CEO succession planning can be a touchy or even difficult subject to address. The departure of a credit union's leader might be something we feel reluctant to discuss, but two important factors are escalating the role of CEO succession planning. The supply of CEO candidates will present challenges, and the demands placed on those candidates will present challenges as well. We talked with consultant Jim Cardwell about the emerging role CEO succession planning should play in credit unions' strategic planning.
So a lot of credit unions, what they have is they just have an envelope, and the envelope has somebody's name on it or maybe a couple of names on it, but it's just, it's not really a succession plan. It doesn't really develop anybody. And so succession planning should be a lot more thoughtful. So the thought really needs to be, where is our credit union at this point in time, and where do we see it headed kind of 3 to 5 years out? What are the major challenges we face, both from an industry perspective and a business perspective, and even in our local footprint perspective? And then what kind of skills would be needed from a CEO to fulfill that kind of a role? And then you need to assess your internal candidates and then look at where their strengths are and where their gaps are to address those kind of issues. And interestingly, but maybe not surprisingly, the skill sets may be different than the current CEO.
Succession planning entails nothing less than charting the course for the credit union's business beyond tomorrow and into the years or even decades to come. Sound challenging? There are plenty of challenges.
In a succession plan, the first challenge is to get the CEO to do a succession plan. I don't think anybody wants to plan their own transition. And so the board really has to take a bigger role in that. So I think that's one element. I think another element is that they need to look beyond yesterday. They need to look, instead of in the rearview mirror, they need to look forward. And they need to look at where's the business heading, what are the challenges of the business, and what do they need to do to kind of build the right kind of future, and what skill sets and leadership ability would be needed to do that. And so, it's kind of a new day in a lot of ways. I mean, there's a lot of traditional things. I think the philosophy won't change, and certainly the bias of really serving the member well won't change. But I think some of the, like distribution, for example, I mean, a lot of people feel that the distribution channel is going to change to mobile, which will change your entire, which will have a big impact on your whole distribution strategy. Since the recession, there's more and more regulations, which makes it harder and harder to make money. So new skill sets might be required, or maybe new lines of business might be required to make that money.
As we said at the outset of this section, the supply of candidates available to replace the retiring generation will present one of the greatest challenges for boards of directors as they plan their futures.
There are going to be a lot of openings, I think, and there have been in the last year. I think up to that point, the openings were fairly minor. I mean, there were some people who retired, but I think a lot of the baby boomers have been waiting to retire because of the economy, because of kind of being able to work their way through retirement, or just things are good and they just didn't want to leave, or they didn't want to leave the credit union, during the problems of the recession. And so I think right now people are getting to a point that they're leaving. And so there are going to be a lot of openings, and then every opening, that candidate comes from someplace else. So that's going to stimulate additional openings. So there will be a multiplier effect.
Where does the process start? What are the steps? And how long does it take?
Yeah, well, I think the first step would be to understand what it is you're trying to do as a business and understand what skill sets there are. But the second thing would be to put together a profile of what you're really looking for, then assess your internal candidates against that profile, and then also assess them from a leadership standpoint. What are their leadership strengths and weaknesses? And that can be done through a 360 assessment. I think a 360 is very helpful in the sense that it's boss, peers, and direct reports providing input to that person on where they're strong and where they're not. I think that there are ways that you can really coach and develop somebody to build leadership skills, but from a timing standpoint, it probably takes about 3 years. So if you know your CEO is going to retire, or says he or she is going to retire in the next 3 years, you need to start right now, not later. And the reason is because if I know what a gap is, let's say somebody doesn't have governmental affairs. I can start getting them involved with the leagues, and I can start getting them involved at the GAC, and I can get them involved with our local congressmen and things like that, so that I can start building that gap. Or if somebody's been a really outstanding CFO, but they've never really had any member-facing experience. If you have strong middle managers, you can move the senior leaders around, and the middle managers can kind of still carry the day. but the leader is still the leader, and they will learn a lot through that transition. But in the first year, they make a lot of decisions. Some are good, some are bad. Probably a number are bad, but you'll learn from them. And then in the second year, they make more better decisions. The third year, they really start mastering it. So if you want a well-balanced person, you need to move them around, but you need to move them around for a long enough time that they truly get the lessons of experience of that move.
What are the barriers we can expect along the way to creating a CEO succession plan?
It's a hard thing for somebody to say, I guess, that somebody's going to come in and do the job differently than the way they're doing it. And then also, I think there's kind of a momentum. I mean, people are used to being the CEO and all the privileges and perks and esteem that comes with that, and I think sometimes it's a hard thing to leave. And so the board really has to take a more active role in making the succession process happen earlier. Because if you don't, it's going to be harder to promote somebody from within. And people coming from the outside aren't necessarily a panacea. I mean, you're going to get good people, but they will definitely come from a different organization with different biases, different structure, different assumptions, different experience, and they're going to want to bring that experience to your organization.
Of course, the work is just beginning for the incoming CEO. Cardwell points out 4 key tasks new CEOs will face as they take the reins. First, a new CEO will need to become comfortable managing board relationships. While the new CEO may have had interactions with board members in the past, that's not the same as being primarily responsible for maintaining the board relationship. The second challenge will be to organize credit union management into a unified team. In the past, the new CEO may have been an effective team member, which is not the same as being an effective team leader. The third challenge, change management. The new CEO will have his or her own vision that may spell a new direction for the credit union, and bringing about change will require a specific skill set. The final challenge is to understand the role of the CEO and where a CEO should be spending his or her time from day to day. So, let's sum up.
The board needs to be involved. The CEO needs to make a plan. The plan needs to be based on business issues. The business issues need to drive the profile or the requirements of the job. Those requirements ought to be used to assess your internal candidates to find the gaps and if they're viable. And if they are, and if you start soon enough, within 2 to 3 years you can actually fill in most of the gaps so that you have a slate of ready now candidates.